What is going on, YouTube? I hope we're all having a fantastic day. Wattson might not be the most utilized legend in the game right now due to her kind of niche kit, but her fences have a near infinite amount of possibilities when it does come to setting them up for engagements in both offensive and defensive situations. Today we're going to look at a handful of different scenarios for when to use Wattson's fences. There's something so oddly satisfying about a good fence placement, and it definitely requires a different type of thought process compared to the majority of the other legends out there. I'm so happy to say that we partnered with Ekster today on this video, the world's largest smart wallet brand. They design innovative solutions to improve the way you carry your everyday items. Big thank you to them for sending me some products to try out, and we'll get more on them later on in the video. Let's just hop right into it. If you do like this video, or if you just want to support me, do me a favor, hit that like button, and I appreciate your support. First up, let's start off with a few of the more unique situations where Wattson can really get enemies away from her. We've all been there. Right off spawn, you are dropping, and before you know it, you're getting punched in the back by some random player that doesn't really care about their game. All they want to do is just punch you to death. I can't tell you how many times I've had this happen to me, but when I am on Wattson, a quick 1-2 fence placement is honestly hilarious to do to enemies. Oftentimes, enemies don't realize what is about to happen to them. The slight delay in the fence actually activating when you're placing it actually helps you out a little bit as they walk right into it. And after this is done, you can do one of two things. You can turn and laser them, or you can get some room to get away from them and go get that weapon and then go back and kill them. This is a super simple tip that will help you out in preventing getting your game griefed right off spawn, which no one wants. You can see it happen to me here in Sorting Factory. This Octane walks right through my fence, gets completely confused, and then just sprints away. This gives me another second to get a gun, kind of get loaded up, and then go fight him. Continuing with the aggressive Wattson theme, rapid fence placement in fights is absolutely a viable way to play, and honestly, unless you're playing ranked, I would definitely encourage you to play this way. It'll make you a better Wattson player and a better overall player because you're going to be taking more fights. This is exactly as it sounds. A Wattson with good positioning and quick hands can really force enemies to get trapped in her fences. Most enemies just do not expect a Wattson to fight in this manner because they are far and few between. You can see it happen here at Hammond Labs in Olympus. My back is up against the wall. Enemies are trying to flood in. I do a quick 1-2 fence placement. The enemy actually gets trapped inside the fence. Doesn't even realize that, but he's taking massive damage just by standing in the fence stationary. He needs to either push in or back out, but he's all stunned and disoriented. He doesn't really know what's going on. And this just keeps happening for a few minutes here. We do end up dying here because it is just off of spawn. But if I did not have these fence placements, there's absolutely no way I would have had any sort of kind of contention with fighting these teams. The next tip is an extremely situational one, and honestly, it's really not too practical, but it is worth mentioning because, again, it's hilarious to do, and if you can pull it off, kudos to you. Wattson can actually fence through doorways on teams that are trying to breach doors. Basically, you just drop a fence node outside of a door or inside of a building, and then you move into or out of the building. Most enemies will not take any thought to this single node being on the ground, as it does look like a broken fence, and then basically, as they are walking through the doorway, you drop that node, and they will get caught in the fence. Moving on, we now have the tip of using fences in and around zip lines. For starters, many buildings like the Streamer building in the center of Fragment on World's Edge are a great thing to fence up. Wattson can actually fence the roof of this building or any of the floors and pretty much prevent anyone from exiting the zip line onto your floor. This is very hard for enemies to counter because they do not want to exit the floor where the fence is. If they do that, they're obviously going to take damage, they're going to get stunned again, and they just don't want to do this because you're going to be there pretty much waiting for them. So this is really good to do, not only to get damage on enemies if they are trying to Leroy you, but of course, you can't get those heals off because it will prevent enemies from going through that zip line. And this also means that if you're blocking off the zip line, you can actually look down the stairs or look at the doorway. This way, you know where they're going to be coming from, as you do have that fence to kind of have your back. Before we get into the rest of the fencing techniques, I want to again thank Ekster for sending me both the Parliament wallet and the tracker card to try out. If you're like me and you're trying to improve your everyday carry in a minimalist way and are super forgetful as to where you are placing things, then their products are absolutely something you should check out. The wallet is sleek, minimal, feels incredible, and has a lot of extremely efficient stores for your cards, cash, and more. I really enjoy how the cards pop out with a small slide of the button on the bottom, and they slide out at an angle so you can't see what one you want. They won't fall out either, which is a concern I did have. The tracker is super simple, effective at keeping track of where my wallet is or really anything else you want to track. This could be luggage, purses, bags, and more. Setup was incredibly simple and I easily linked it to my phone. I can also use the ping button on the tracker to help me find my phone, which is also super helpful as I always seem to misplace it. Thank you again to Ekster for sending me these products to try out, and they didn't pay me anything to say all this. It's genuinely a great product, and if you want to check them out and anything they have to offer, there is an affiliate link in the description below, and that will give you a discount to help support me and the channel. Moving on now, let's start discussing some of the more defensive fencing techniques in the game. We will start with some of the basics and then move on from here, as the later tips are really going to start building on the previous tips. A lot of the techniques will require the use of Wattson's ultimate from here on out to get our fences back to charge faster, so be aware of this as we proceed, and be sure to carry ultimate accelerants so you can use your pylon a little bit more. Obviously, the most simple fence placement is going to be your 1-2 fence placement across doors and openings. As always, a great fence placement puts the fence nodes as far out of sight as possible to people trying to enter that area. If an enemy player has to really try to angle themselves to hit that fence node to break it to enter, this will allow you to make a counterplay while they try to line up to do that. Simple 2-node fence placements are going to be a great way when you do need to cover a little bit more area, or if you're in some high action scenarios where mass fence placement just isn't allowed because you don't have the time. Also, it's great when you do not have your ultimate, since your fences do come back much slower if you're not standing next to that pylon. Also, 2-node fences should be placed when you're kind of patrolling building with a lot of different doorways or areas to block off, as you don't want to use 3 or 4 fence nodes on a single door and then only be able to cover maybe 3 or 4 access points. This, of course, is the most basic fencing technique, but it is worth saying if you are kind of newer to Wattson. Moving on from the simple 2-node placement, we now have the 3 or 4-node placement. Some people say this isn't necessary, but I do believe there are some cases for adding a lot of extra defense to a single doorway or an opening. Again, by adding more nodes, you are doubling or tripling the amount of nodes an enemy needs to break to get through that fence. And if they decide to Leroy Jenkins you, they get hit with double or triple the amount of damage walking through this multiple layer of fence security, which honestly is pretty underrated, and the damage does add up. A triple fence looks like a triangle like this, and a 4 fence node placement is an X or a Z type pattern when you're placing it. I would only use the 3 or the 4 node fence placement like this on doors if you know you do not have a lot of area to cover. So maybe if your back is up against a wall, if you're in kind of a dead end area, then I would do this. So again, maybe some smaller buildings with less access points or a single opening that people may try to walk through. And again, because you are using more nodes on a single access point, this means you can't cover as much area, and it is a trade-off that you do need to be aware of. I, again, though, probably would only use 3 or 4 node fence placements around doors like this if you do have your ultimate, because again, you're not going to get your fence nodes back as fast as you do when you do have that pylon. Moving on from our basic door and entry coverage, we now have a small building lockdown configuration when you're fencing up. When fencing buildings, it's crucial to again be placing fences as separated as possible while also having redundant fence layers. Again, try your best to hide the nodes so they do have to take much more time destroying the fences. In a smaller building, it is even more so to try and block off entrances so they don't even have the ability to get in your building or your area. Again, they can probably fight you right away if you are in a smaller building, since you do have less area to patrol and they are going to be pretty much like right there outside of your area. However, you should absolutely be again crossing the fences as much as possible. Zigzag the fences through the room even if they are crisscrossing each other, because again, this does require enemies to take more time in destroying those nodes. If they don't even try to destroy the nodes and they're walking through your fences, then this is a huge plus for you and you should be able to absolutely destroy them. I think what is honestly the most underappreciated thing about fences is not only does it do all those obvious damage, stun, screen affecting things to enemies, but it requires enemies to use part of their magazine to destroy the fences. This means less damage to you, and it does require them to take their attention off of you, which can be absolutely huge. Moving on now to the larger building lockdown, the principle is still the same as the smaller buildings with the zigzagging of the fences to create multiple layers of security. However, this time, you are now going to need to spread out a little bit more, which means I do want to emphasize, do not overextend the amount of area you want to control, because you cannot be in 2 spots at once monitoring breaches from both sides if you are too expanded in your lockdown of your area. On top of this, the bigger the area you do try to lock down, the bigger the target you will become, which is something that you probably do not want to do. This could mean fighting multiple teams at the same time on different ends of your fence zone. This is one of the bigger things to understand with Wattson. You don't want to cover too much area. You'll notice here in the bunker near Hammond Lab and Turbine, I'm actually fencing up this central area, which is a pretty large area, but I am not going up the stairs or up to the tunnel to the escape room on the side, because I just won't be able to monitor those areas effectively. But by staying down low here on level ground and keeping it all within gun's reach, it does allow me to monitor the area a little bit better. However, be mindful, as fencing on low ground is a bit easier to break if the fences are under the other enemies, because they can look down onto the nodes very easily. You'll also notice where I fence this up. This area is super popular. There's always people rotating in here, and we were on the edge of zone, so I figured let's fence up this area in case someone is trying to rotate from Hammond Labs at the last second, and I will be able to catch them off guard. Now let's start looking at the outside fencing techniques, starting off with the more enclosed alleyways and areas where enemies do need to funnel through. While Wattson isn't that typical aggressive movement legend, I find she can really excel in tunnel fighting and does create unique engagements that can really annoy enemies. All the tips and principles we have learned so far are still very applicable. Double layer your fences, hide the nodes if possible. This time though, it is extremely important to be mindful of the floor terrain. Do not fence off an alley that is slightly dipped in the middle. A lot of the areas on World's Edge are like this. If you do this, enemies may be able to crouch and slide right through your perimeter, making it pretty much pointless. Also, try to be mindful where the enemies are going to be coming from. I personally like to place myself square in the middle because I do enjoy the high octane action that these fences can create. And Wattson isn't by default that aggressive legend, even though you can't play aggressive with her. So I like to be creative with my fence placement so I can kind of get the enemies to come in to my hand and play the way I want them to play. Be creative, and it doesn't have to always be enclosed tunnels. It could be choke points, ridges, valleys. It's important to understand your position in relation to the ring so you can prepare and plan ahead. Finally, we have one of the harder fence types to master, and this is going to be open areas. I find this to be fairly challenging because, of course, it's pretty much impossible to predict every scenario and push. You absolutely want to try and fence high ground when available because enemies will not be able to destroy your fences if they are underneath you because they just cannot see the base nodes. This gives you a huge advantage when you are picking from range, and also do not try to control every square inch of the map again. You'll see here, I'm outside a fragment, and I'm really just trying to control those areas that enemies could just blatantly walk through with my fences, and also making some intermediate fences, so I do kind of have a couple other layers of security. It's very easy for them to simply climb over the walls, but that's just that. They have to climb and work around the fences, and I'm already mentally thinking that this could happen, so I'm being ready for this type of engagement, and I'm already kind of making them play into my hand by forcing them to climb. This will, of course, make themselves completely revealed, and it will be a much more advantageous way for me to fight them. When fencing up, though, be aware of the weak points, and this kind of goes back to when you are fencing up, make sure you're very aware of the weak points and where enemies may try to make some pushes. This will just help you be more planned, more prepared for where the breaches are going to occur, so you can keep a closer eye on those areas. Of course, there's a lot of uniqueness with Wattson and her fences, and this isn't a complete guide. Wattson has had very few changes since we did post our full guide video, and the link to that video will be in the corner of your screen and in the description down below. If you want a complete breakdown of Wattson, or if you just have any more questions regarding her, hop into our Twitch streams, which are nearly daily, or just stop by our community Discord and you can chat with myself in the community, or if you're trying to find people to play with. I hope this video was helpful. Until next time, happy gaming, legends.